Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. So today what I thought I'd do is take a look at the deck that I've been alluding to now for a few episodes of Saturday Morning Nostalgia. The deck in question I found interesting because this deck does exist as a product, but it doesn't exist in paper. It exists purely online. In 2009, Wizards released something called the Commander theme decks. There were two of them. There was one that was headed up by Xira, and the other was headed up by Rubinia. So a bit of background to this. What happened was, when I was doing the sort of show notes, for want of a better word, for Saturday Morning Nostalgia, I actually went back and looked at, although I started in 2010 with the series, focusing on 2010 onwards, I took a look at 2009, basically because I needed a bit of background for the Zendikar block, because I was covering Rise of the Eldrazi. And I sort of reacquainted myself with the existence of this particular product. And like I said, 2009, the Commander theme decks, there was an Enchantress Rubinia, which had Rubinia, and the other one they called Deathdancer Xira, which had Xira Arien as the commander. So obviously, being commander decks, these were 100 card decks. They had like an online foil of the commander. They also contained cards from what were called the Masters Edition 3 sets, and also several other cards that have never before been released on Magic Online. What you have to understand with Magic the Gathering Online is that the online product came out after the early paper Magic sets. So at some point in time, Wizards had to like infill the missing cards, and they did that a couple of ways. In one instance, what they did was with the case of Tempest, prior to Tempest, which would have been Mirage. So the Mirage set, when they released that online, they actually produced a set of online-only theme decks to go with that. And they've also done other things like, as I've referred to just now, the Masters Edition sets. So these were aggregate sets for drafting, which was a way of getting early sets from sort of pre-Tempest. So going back to say Ice Age and before. So those early sets which weren't technically part of a block, and they were distributed into the environment through the existence of these Masters Edition sets. So having online only product was definitely a thing before these Commander theme decks, and it's certainly been a thing after it. I mean, after these came out, they had the Magic Online deck series, which were 2 legacy legal decks. They also had a Momia basic event deck, which was definitely online only. And then more recently, we've had things like the Vintage Masters release. We had Tempest Revisited, which was an aggregate of the Tempest block, and things like the Cube as well. So it's definitely a thing online. But I think what's fascinating about this is the fact that this product, in particular, because it's Commander, and the fact that we had this Commander paper product that came out, but a lot of people would be completely unaware that there was a Commander product which existed a couple of years before that, and it was online. So I thought what would be fun was just to basically build one of the decks in paper. Now, I went through both of the decks, looked at things like pricing and just cards that I had and just interest value, and when all factors considered, I decided that I would build the Xira Arien deck, basically the green, red, black deck, or the the black, red, green, if you want to put it correctly. I'll show you something interesting that I've noticed as well with different printings in Magic. Initially, when I put the deck together, because I was going through and trying to pull cards from what I currently owned, I did have a rather faded copy of Xira from Chronicles. That's white border. I know it has a legend symbol on it, but what they did in Chronicles was it was an aggregates paper set which they reproduced the set symbol, but they made them white borders. I don't know how easy this is to see. Actually, you can see it better side by side, but this is incredibly faded. The printing looks pretty poor quality as well on here. So I thought if I put the deck together, I would do a bit of an upgrade. I went for the Italian copy. I think when I ordered this online with a load of other cards, that was the only one that was available. One of the problems with older cards, you just sort of hit two problems. And again, it depends on the size of the whoever you're buying it from. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get these cards. We've got a card which is from Legends, so this is way back. Also, the quality, because back then people probably weren't playing in sleeves, so it's going to be actually hard to get a nice quality copy if that's what you're after. But I was lucky enough to track down an Italian version which is in pretty decent shape. There's a few nicks around the corners there, but generally there's not a lot of surface play on here, which looked like what the problem as well was with the other card. So that was about $5. I think if you were to track down the English version of this card from the original Legends, it's going to be around about $10 for that. One other interesting thing, as you can see, two commanders from different eras here. Robinia Soul Singer is also available in an earlier set. This is the commander version of this, which was in one of the commander products. Would have also been, I think, there was around about the same. Certainly put it in a position chronologically where it would have been in the same magic borders as this particular card. But you'll notice the wording if we actually go back, just to make it easier to the English language version. So back then, Legends would have just said Summon Legend, unless you were an Elder Dragon, then you would have had Summon Elder Dragon Legend on you. But Legend had just Summon Legend. Also, creatures would have Summon and then the creature type. So you might have like Summon Spirit or Summon Nightmare or Summon Dragon on there, instead of now where we've got legendary creature, in this case of Robinia legendary creature Fairy. I suspect the original would have had just Summon Fairy on it, or maybe at that point fairies didn't exist, but unfortunately I don't have that copy of the card in my collection, so I can't compare it. So that's the difference on the Legend cards, if you're interested. Now, the other thing here, I don't know if you noticed that, I think I'll put the card away, is I've only just noticed that the colour on the cards is actually in a different order. In the English language from Chronicles, it's black, red, green. The Italian version is green, red, black on there from Legends. So obviously that would have been a thing. Now let's have a look at this deck. In this video, I'm just basically going to go through the deck and look at the cards, but we're not going to go too in depth in things like lines of play of this deck. I'm not totally comfortable with this deck at the moment. I do have a version of it online as well, and I've been sort of just playing around with it to try and get a feel of how it plays. It's a pretty intensive deck to play. There's lots of really subtle synergies in here. It doesn't appear to be on the surface super powerful, but once certain cards sort of line up with one another, there's some very, very clever graveyard shenanigans that you can do with this deck, and over time I might do other videos based around this deck, which talk a little bit about upgrades, or basically just how the deck hangs together in terms of its what it's currently consisting of. So our commander is Xira Arien, which is a black, green, red commander. It's 1/2, has flying, and for on this card green, red, black tap, or if you're on the other one, black, red, green tap. It has target player draws a card. Okay, target player draws a card. And so what I'm going to do is just go through the deck, and the way I've got this organised was basically conducive to ordering, and just the way this deck came out when I created the list of the deck from the original online list. So you'll notice that I've got lands first, basically in alphabetical order. Then next there's creatures, I think in alphabetical order, and then spells. So each chunk is in alphabetical order. So we've got Barren Moor in here. Daragaz's Caldera, which is an interesting lair. So it says Daragaz's Caldera is a lair in addition to its land type. So when Daragaz's Caldera comes into play, sacrifice it unless you return a non-lair land you control to its owner's hand. Tap, add black, red, green to your mana pool. Now again, remember, because of the timing of this, there's going to be certain tri-colour lands which would obviously have been in this deck if it was printed at a different point in time, but aren't. So in terms of if I was to sort of upgrade the deck and fiddle around slightly with the basic land side of things, maybe put more utility, more fixing in here, then that would be a sort of go-to play. So I'm talking about specifically, like the whole Khans block stuff. So we have some forests here, and basically I just pulled some land from the Shadows over Innistrad set, which I happen to have handy, but I'm probably looking to put some older lands in this particular deck. As you saw, we've got a black cycling land. We have the red one in here, Forgotten Cave. So it comes into play tapped, tap, add red to your mana pool, cycling for single red. There's Ghost Quarter in here. Golgari Rot Farm. Gruul Turf. Jund Panorama. So obviously when it came out, sets like the Shards block was out, so that's obviously very helpful if you're trying to fix for 3 colours with a tricolour themed set. So we've got our mountains now. Rakdos Carnarium. Rupture Spy is also in here, as is Savage Lands, and our swamps. And a Terramorphic Expanse, Tranquil Thicket, which is our green cycling land. And we're now moving on to our creatures. So you can see there that mana base is pretty straightforward into the sort of cards from a budgetary point of view you might see in a 3-colour deck. Obviously there's other slightly more expensive non-basic lands we could put in there, and obviously there's some other budget lands which came from later sets which would be useful because we're running 3 colours. Now if we go on to the creatures in alphabetical order, we've got Abyssal Gatekeeper in here. So there's a lot of graveyard shenanigans going on in this deck, in terms of cards that sort of play nice with the graveyard, and other cards that really quite like being in the graveyard, and other cards which will are easily returned from the graveyard. So we have Anarchist, we've got Avatar of Woe, also cards that care about how well stocked your graveyard is. And we have Anger. So this is an interesting card. There's several of this type of card in this deck actually. So 3 in a red, haste. As long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. And what you'll see in this deck is there's quite a few ways of getting this into your deck. I mean, an easy way is basically not to play any cards, so you overstock your hand, and then once you get up to 7 cards you have to discard any beyond that at the end of your turn and get it in that way if it's in your hand. You can also, if you play it, there's various cards in here that allow you to sack other creatures, and also this, because there's dredge in here, you could end up discarding that card from your library into or milling from your library into the graveyard. I think there may even be some discard cards in here as well. So there's, I think 4 different ways in which you can get those sort of cards in here. Here's the other one. Here's Brawn. So this is the green one. And if you've got that in your graveyard and you control a forest, then creatures you control have trample. Carrion Feeder's in here. So that's a sack outlet. Chartooth Tiger has mountain cycling on it, but also has fire breathing, so a great way of getting rid of that, leveraging that excess red mana. Civic Wayfinder. So there's some ramp in here. We've got green, so that's really helpful, and some card draw as well. We've got Elvish Visionary. We've got Eternal Witness, way of getting cards back from the graveyard. Flame Tongue Kavu. Genesis. So another card that cares about being in the graveyard. We've got Golgari Grave Troll, which is one of our dredge cards. So Golgari Grave Troll enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature card in your graveyard. 1, remove +1/+1 counter from Golgari Grave Troll, regenerate Golgari Grave Troll, and it has dredge 6. So if we look at Golgari Thug, which is a dredge 4, we can understand a bit more about how dredge works. So in addition to the fact that when Golgari Thug dies, put a target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library, it also has dredge 4. So for dredge 4, if you would draw a card instead, you may put exactly 4 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Otherwise, draw a card. Hissing Iguana is in here. So a card that basically cares about stuff going into your graveyard. And you can see how with stuff moving in and out of the graveyard and cards that are going to help synergize and facilitate that, how this can sort of be abused. Keldon Vandals has Echo. When Keldon Vandals comes into play, destroy target artifact. Artifact destruction. A 4/1. Crozen Tusker has cycling and is a way of getting a basic land card. Nezumi Grave Robber. You can get rid of a target card from an opponent's graveyard from the game on its ability, and then of course it's this sort of, I don't know what you quite do, these cards which have 2 parts of them, where you flip, what's called flip them. So you're not flipping them that way, but you're flipping them top to bottom to reveal another type creature there and a different set of abilities. Penumbra Bobcat. So again, cards that care about being put into the graveyard or have abilities that trigger when they're put into the graveyard. That one generates a 2/1 Black Cat creature token when you do that. Root Breaker Worm. It's just a 5/2 green trample 6/6. So the interesting point with this deck is that obviously as we're going through it, if you're like me, you're looking and saying, well, there could be better cards in here than these. So something like this. So you've got a 7 mana 6/6 with trample. I'm sure there's more recent cards in green, creature cards, which you could either say, you know, similar power and toughness creature with a better ability, that could be a lower cost, or something with the same cost with a better ability and, you know, better power and toughness, or something that maybe interacts with the graveyard better for a similar cost and a similar power and toughness. Sakura Tribe Elder. You'll see there's quite a few ways in this deck of searching out basic land cards. Also got Shambling Shell, another dredge card. We've got Shriekmaw with the Evoke on it. And again, you'll see one or two cards in here which, if you're familiar with, say, the Commander product, you see cropping up a lot in those that are really popular as, you know, staples in certain colours. We've got Shrinkweed Imp, another dredge card. Twisted Abomination with Swamp Cycling on it and Regeneration. Vampiric Dragon, another good synergy with the graveyard there. Werebear, there's Threshold on it. So, you know, a number of cards here whose abilities are improved by cards being in the graveyard. Wickerbower Elder, Wild Mongrel, so got discard on here. So another way, if you've got one of those, you know, cards that is you can leverage stuff by it being in the graveyard, and you happen to have it in your hand, then this is one way that you can use to get it in there if Wild Mongrel is in play. Weirwood Guardian, it's got Forest Cycling on it. You have a Maya Elder. So now we're going to move on to the non-creature spells, and we move on to the card which is the proxy in here. So this is the card that is, you know, if you were to buy this copy, which is the only copy that there is. I mean, there's probably a foreign language version of this. But if you were to get an English language version of Legends, this would, I believe, be $100. So in the sleeve, it's probably not too easy to spot what's been going on here. But as you get closer, you can see some sort of anomalies here. So how I created this card was basically I took a magic card. I think it was one that, yeah, it was one I'd pulled out of a Dollar Armor pack. It was from Ice Age. And I simply then printed on sort of thin laser print paper on an colour inkjet printer. I just printed out a copy of All Hallows Eve at the right size, and then basically printed it, you know, using a glue stick to the front of the card. You can see it's really clear down the bottom there. It's extremely wonky. It's a bit too close there, but you know, I wasn't intended to pass it off as the All Hallows Eve, but I wanted a placer in here, and obviously one of the first things I would do in this deck is look as an alternative to this. Now, there's not a card that does exactly what All Hallows Eve does, and I'm just going to read this card out to you because it's an interesting, it's one of these ones with a real big rules text on it. So, put 2 counters on this card. Remove a counter during your upkeep. When you remove the last counter from All Hallows Eve, all players take all creatures from their graveyards and put them directly into play. Treat these creatures as though they were just summoned. You choose what order they come into play. So they don't all come into play under your control. They come into play under the owner's control. Now, the wording on this has changed very slightly just to make it clear exactly what happens when they come into play and who has control of them. So if you look at the errata online, you'll see the wording slightly differently. But I'm sure many people on this video, watching this video, who've got, you know, a lot of experience of Magic and other cards, will probably be aware that there are cards in Magic which will do a similar thing to this. I don't think there's one that does exactly the same, but certainly there are cards which will return a whole load of creatures from your graveyard. Now, interestingly, there's a number of cards which will just do it one-sided. So there might be better cards than this, albeit at a higher mana cost, which will just basically just return your cards, into play under your control. I'm trying to think if there's any card at all that will actually return all the cards in the graveyards into play under your control. Maybe someone can come and point me in the right direction of that if there is indeed such a card. The other thing that would be quite nifty to replace this card is maybe with another black card that cares about graveyards being stocked, because obviously you're messing about with your graveyard, and that's could be fairly full at some points. It might be empty at others as you use various synergies to get cards out of the graveyard. But equally, your opponents are going to have cards in their graveyards. So maybe there's a black card that might be useful, or something in green or red, which could take advantage of graveyard. Maybe, for whatever reason, to get rid of problematic cards in other players' graveyards, you might want to pack a bit of graveyard hate, even though obviously a lot of these cards benefit from other cards in other players' graveyards. Maybe there's something in one of the commander products, because there would have been a commander product out with the same three colours in it, which would be synergistic within this deck. And also I can think of things like there's some oozes there which do interesting things with the abilities of cards in graveyards, and when you put them into play they assume the abilities of and features of other cards in the graveyards. So that's just something that at some point I'm going to have to swap out, I think. Ancient Grudge. So we're moving on to our non-creature spells. Animate Dead. You'll see a lot of cards here that are going to bring stuff back from the graveyard or put stuff into the graveyard. Ashes to Ashes. Buried Alive is in here. Cauldron Dance. Quite a few of these cards I didn't have. Chain Lightning's in here. This was reasonably expensive, although it is a later version of the card. The original would have been pretty expensive, I think, in paper. It's probably one of the more expensive cards in the deck, but I did fancy a copy of it anyway, so I thought it was a good investment. Constant Mist is in here. It's got bites. Is that the fog effect with buyback on it? Creatures deal no damage this turn. Dread Return. Edge of Autumn. Alvin Cash. Way of getting a target card from your graveyard to your hand. Because obviously with the dredge mechanic you may end up with cards in your graveyard that you don't necessarily want there, and there's still got to be ways of getting stuff back here. We've got Explosive Vegetation, Fires of Yavimaya, and then you'll see a number of sort of on-colour artefacts in here as well. We've got Golgari Signet, we've got an instant in the form of Grim Harvest, then we've got Gruul Signet, Harmonise, which is card draw in green, Kodama's Reach is in here, Life from the Loam, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Greaves, Massacre, Phyrexian Negotiator, which I think would have come, I wonder if this would have come from the, it's a foil one, so this would have come from a, was it Phyrexia versus the Coalition deck, I think? Yeah, I think that might have been the lead card in that. Putrefy, Rakdos Signet, Reaping the Graves, Recollect, another way of getting a card back, Resounding Thunder, Skull Clamps in here, and also Terminate. Oh, and a Terror as well. I actually had a rather nice old Terror in here. This is white border, so this is probably, I wonder what edition that is. Doesn't have a year on it, so I wonder if that's from Revised, maybe. Anyway, so there we've got the deck. Hopefully that's of interest. So you know, good example of something that existed online only. I've obviously reproduced that. I think, as I mentioned, some of the cards I had, some I just bought online. What I'll do is I'll make sure I print the or I include the deck list in the description of this video. So then if people are interested, they can go and sort of price up the deck, because, you know, I could say a price for this deck and then, you know, it could change all over the place. I think, from what I can remember, with the All Hallows Eve in it, the deck was around 130, 140 bucks. I'm not sure. But obviously with it taken out, that reduces the price quite considerably. You know, the more expensive cards in here are that where's it gone? The other red direct damage spell, because that wasn't really printed. Yeah, Chain Lightning, and some of the dredge creatures, the Golgari. Was it the Golgari Grave Troll? I think it is. Was on the more expensive cards, but a lot of these are very, very cheap indeed. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye for now.